flyweight finishers square off in London as we have Birmingham's own White Kong Jake Hadley, the former Cage Warriors and EFC champ, and he's going to be taking on London, Ontario's own Malcolm Gordon. And I say flyweight finishers because 11 wins for Malcolm Gordon are by finish, and he's able to get it done in all sorts of different ways. 5 by knockout, 6 by submission, and I didn't mention it, but you consider the title lineage for both of these guys. Malcolm Gordon was a WXC champ in the States, he was a TKO champ in Quebec, Canada, and Gordon fought a high-level competition outside of the UFC. And I know some of the wins, he fought Michael Jordan, and I'll throw the picture up there now. Jumpman tattoo, looks like a skinny 125 Alexander Usyk. And in that fight, if you go back and watch it, I mean, round 1, jab, long range straight, and then he goes out there and lands a couple of those on a right hook, and he springboards Michael Jordan into a knockout loss. WXC champ at that time was Malcolm Gordon, and I know for Gordon in the UFC, things haven't really gone his way. He's been billed as a good grappler, and I thought he was a really good grappler coming into the UFC. Now, you're going to struggle against Amir Albazi. Extreme Couture Zone. You're going to struggle against Mokaev in parts. There were also parts where Gordon almost submitted Mokaev, if you go back and watch that fight. But the 2 wins that Gordon has, one over Francisco Figueiredo, where he closed the distance, takes him down, grinds him out, makes it a little boring, and then his win against Denis Bondar. Well, we don't see injuries like that very often.
No, we don't.
He goes for the takedown. Bondar goes for a takedown at one point, and then as Bondar is posting up with his left arm, the body weight of Malcolm Gordon as he shifts snaps that left arm very, very badly. But Gordon in the UFC, he struggled a little bit because where he found success with the recklessness and the striking on the regional scene, it's gotten him caught in the UFC. And that's been kind of to his detriment. Even in the 3rd round against Mokaev, he kind of goes for some long-rangey stuff.
Yeah.
And then he kind of slips out of it, and he ends up getting taken down and ground out. But I will say, again, Gordon found success. One of the rounds in that fight against Mokaev, he ends up, he has that rear naked choke in, and as the fight goes on, he also had it in at another point. He just wasn't able to scare these things. So I'm eager to see what we get out of Malcolm Gordon in this matchup, because he goes from fighting one really hyped prospect to now one hyped prospect in Jake Hadley, who I think some of the shine came off when he lost to Alon Nascimento in the debut. Hadley was a pretty big favorite in the fight against Nascimento.
That Tyrion Ware treatment, though.
And he did struggle. So Hadley, his last time out, faces Carlos Candelario, a guy somewhat similar to Malcolm Gordon in the fact that Candelario likes to take you down, get on top, land the ground and pound. We haven't seen it in the UFC yet, but that's what Candelario excels in. Jake Hadley almost made it look easy in that fight.
He looked really good.
Really tough to tell. It's another kind of great reset for Jake Hadley in the matchup against Malcolm Gordon. For Gordon, just looking to right the ship, coming off a fight where you're not going to find a bigger underdog when Gordon took on Mokaev.
And that's the problem for Malcolm Gordon. This is a difficult matchup for him anyway, stylistically, and he's coming off of the most difficult stylistic matchup he could really face by any prospect in the division. For Mokaev, he really is kind of a one-of-one in the division. I know there's a lot of exciting prospects at 125 right now, but I think Gordon's going to have to use his striking a lot in this matchup, which is a weird thing to say because
I think he's got better boxing than Jake Hadley.
I definitely do, but you wouldn't think that watching a lot of his fights. You wouldn't think, wow, Gordon's the guy who should work behind the jab and try to work in his combinations. But I do think he does have the heavier hands out of these two, and I think he's the more sound fighter defensively. Now, not by an extreme shot. I don't think Malcolm Gordon's one of the great boxers of all time, but I do think he is going to be the more effective fighter in the stand-up throughout this matchup. The problem for me is I've never really seen Malcolm Gordon go out there and just box for 15 minutes. At a certain point, he is going to implement the takedown and the grappling, and I do think he's going to have to defend against that quite a bit in this matchup. So for me, I just question how much damage Malcolm Gordon's going to be able to do on the feet, because if he is able to make use of some of that distance, I think he could be able to win this fight. But the problem is he's going to have to really make sure those are damaging shots, and he's really going to have to be able to threaten with some of those submissions. I'm glad you brought it up. I just don't know if he's going to be able to get that back control type of a position on a guy like Hadley. Now, could he get maybe a guillotine threaten with some of those spots? Yes, he could, but if you're threatening with guillotines, that means your opponent is normally pretty deep in on a takedown. And if Jake Hadley is a guy who's going for kind of those 11 of 13 type of a game plan, like we saw, Merab went, 11 for 49. So not necessarily the same percentages, but you get the idea. I just think Hadley's really going to do a great job of closing that distance. And for Gordon, it's going to come down to how much damage he can do on the feet. For me, I don't know how much confidence I have in that game plan for him.
You go back through and you watch some of the Malcolm Gordon fights. He beats Chris Kaliadis on the Bellator scene. So both guys with some Bellator Bellator experience, or at least, Gordon has it. That's a really big name. I mean, Chris had, good success over in Europe or overseas, and he's a guy from Eastern Canada, just like we are, so giant win for Malcolm Gordon. And you do consider he beat Yoni Sherbatov for that TKO belt, and Yoni, I mean, he owns his own gym in Laval. He was also on The Ultimate Fighter, and in that fight, Yoni Sherbatov, is like 5'2", and I don't mean that as a joke, but he's a smaller guy.
Yeah.
So how does he win fights? He rushes guys, and he goes in and blitzes Gordon, and he wobbles him, and then he blitzes him again, and he wobbles him again, and somehow, out of all of it, Malcolm Gordon's able to get it down, get the back. Sherbatov stands up. He already looked like he was hurt out of one of the exchanges. Stands up. Gordon's got the rear naked choke in. They slam down, and Gordon ends up winning by finish. And even in the fight that Gordon won against Francisco Figueiredo, 2 of 11 in the takedowns, he was able to get some of his boxing going. Gordon's one of those guys. Trains out of Adrenaline MMA in London, Ontario. With Bazooka Joe Valtellini, he's going to have Mark Hominick in his corner for this fight. I listened to an interview that Gordon did with James Lynch with Bodog, which is a strange interview site to do things with, but they don't both do business with him, so it is what it is. And Chris Horodesky's also out of that gym, a guy who had a lot of success over with WEC, just not against Donald Cerrone. So when you look at the matchup, Jake Hadley, a guy that's training close to home, again, a guy that is out of Birmingham. So you look at the fights, Matt, you look at the success that these guys have had, and even Jake Hadley, Fearless MMA, you're going to see that come up in some of these videos, as well as Team Renegade BJJ. You've got Leon Edwards out of that gym. You also have Jai Herbert training out of that gym as well. Yeah. Jake Hadley's record is not the same as Malcolm Gordon's. For a younger guy, it's nice to see 9-1, but Hadley is a win over a guy who right now, Reece Street, he was 0-24 then, he's 0-40 now, he was 5-44 as an amateur, and his record's flagged by Tapology as being one of those guys that probably isn't going to win the fights that people match him in. So Reece Street, got to look out, but good wrestling, good jiu-jitsu out of Jake Hadley, and he has the ability to utilize some really good fight IQ in the wins that we've seen to change things up between his boxing and his striking. I mean, I go back to the fight that Jake Hadley had on the regional scene against Luke Shanks, where he gets hit really hard, really quick at the start, and then he goes out and just out-wrestles him for the entire fight and ends up kind of grinding in a decision win.
I think there will be matchups out there where Hadley will struggle with. I just think this fight against Gordon, it is stylistically quite favorable towards a guy like Hadley, just because Gordon, I think, does have the advantage on the feet, don't get me wrong, but how does Gordon win a lot of his fights? He does enjoy a lot of the grappling, and I do think it'll be difficult for him to out-grapple a guy like Jake Hadley. We'll see. Not to give away my pick too early.
We'll see how it goes. I mean, Hadley's a juiced-up favorite. Malcolm Gordon, pretty big underdog. I don't agree with it to the extent that it's at right now. I understand why Muhammad Mokaev was a big favorite. Malcolm Gordon, I know he got finished in that one, but he did enjoy a few successes there. And if you watched it, Mokaev fought with his hands down. He got hit by a lot of those long-range combinations.
Can I throw a question at you quick?
Yeah.
If Taira fights Hadley, what do you think the odds would be?
Taira's favored to win that one. He's probably minus 175.
I'd probably agree with that. I just think it'll be interesting because there are a lot of these prospects who are kind of rising at similar times. So I think at a certain point they are going to start to have to fight each other before they get into the top 15. So I'll be interested to see who some of these guys get matched up with moving forward.
We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprised us there to you. I'm going to say over under 70% Jake Hadley.
I think they'll be over.
I think they're going to be over. They're over 886 total votes. 86% with Jake Hadley. 33% by decision, 52% by submission. For the 14% that have Malcolm Gordon, 65% have Gordon to win by decision. And when you consider for Malcolm Gordon, he has been submitted in the past, once by Mokaev, by armbar, once by Amir Albazi. So those two submission losses in the UFC. Matt, I do have Jake Hadley to get the win. I think he can impose physically, but I think like we saw a little bit in the early part of the Shanks fight, like we saw against Alon Nascimento, who was much bigger.
Yeah.
We saw those guys enjoy some successes briefly in the striking. Malcolm Gordon can have that success all the way out, but Malcolm Gordon seems to be one of those guys that, I know you can't take caffeine before you fight, but does he eat like 5 bags of Sour Patch Kids and he just goes out and fights like sicko mode? He's just out there doing so much stuff. I think Jake Hadley can dial it down and just fight at his own pace, but Gordon is a pretty big underdog. I think he has a decent shot. Do you think Sour Patch Kids are his snack of choice?
My favorite snacks are peanut M&Ms.
Okay.
I'll argue with anybody about that. I think peanut M&M's the GOAT snack. I have Jake Hadley in the matchup, though. I kind of gave it away a little bit earlier, but even when Malcolm Gordon does have success on the feet, he will tend to grapple at a certain point in the fight, and I just think Hadley's going to be the more effective grappler in the matchup. I've been wrong before, I'll be wrong again, but I do like Jake Hadley in this fight.
Both of us going with Jake Hadley to get the win in the matchup. Do you have Canada's own Malcolm Gordon or the man out of Birmingham? You let us know down below in the comments section. Some big time fights, 15 of them. The video's going to be long. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.